I'm Jen, the Oregon Trail Gen X nerd, and in this video I'd like to offer a counselor's case for giving Ben Solo one more chance. Trigger warning, there are discussions of violence, emotional strain, and death. If you've watched some of my videos or maybe read my blog, you may know that I work and teach in spaces related to the teaching of counseling. And in this video, I'll be presenting kind of a verbal essay on the topic of why I'd really like to see more big media companies shifting the values that are embedded in their work, in particular to be countering narratives around punishment, who deserves it, how severe it needs to be, and what redemption looks like. In case you don't watch any further, my point is this. The Hunt for Ben Solo could provide a hopeful and instructive narrative for young men who've screwed up and would like the chance to atone for their mistakes. And that's important because there are so few such stories with blockbuster backing. Let me open this video with transparency on a few items. First, other writers and YouTubers have already addressed a lot of the high-level concepts in Star Wars, though not many have done it through this video's lens, which is mental health. I'll provide a list in the video box below of some of the things that I've read or watched. Second, a Ben Solo movie as a companion to the Rey movie that is apparently still in production would help to fix a well-trodden and I will argue harmful trope that was used at the end of The Rise of Skywalker, that Ben had to die in order to be redeemed for all of the terrible things he did as Kylo Ren. Third, and of course, nothing in this video is meant to offer specific guidance on your psychological well-being. If you feel terrible, please reach out for help locally. As we learned in Andor, you have friends everywhere. Seek them out. This issue of the opportunity for redemption when someone is genuinely sorry for something they did is a valuable one to address through Star Wars because the Star Wars franchise is ubiquitous. Why is Star Wars ubiquitous? It speaks to some fundamental themes that cross cultural boundaries, and other wiser people than me have made videos about that. But in crossing cultural boundaries and becoming ubiquitous, I wonder how Star Wars may have inadvertently contributed to some societal narratives about the nature of punishment and the possibility of redemption. In particular, Star Wars is about love and hope broadly, but there's often no hope for individuals who have made mistakes and are seeking to redeem themselves. So far, they've been required to die. The script entitled The Hunt for Ben Solo, developed by director Steven Soderbergh and actor Adam Driver, who played Kylo Ren, who is actually Ben Solo, would have had to address this issue of redemption in some way or another, because Ben also died this way. And if he were to return, he would have to actually walk the path of redemption. I use the past tense here, so I should add the film could still address this issue because the script exists, and Lucasfilm had already ensured that it fit into Star Wars canon. It just needs a budget and a schedule. We'll see what happens when Disney's new leadership takes over this week. So here's the well-trodden Star Wars trope, if you're not sure what I mean. Our hero dies to save a person he loves. Star Wars has done that over and over, just from the Skywalker saga. I didn't even have to Google it because there are so many. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, Han Solo, and Ben Solo to start. There are a number of strong women I could also include, but for the sake of the focus of this video, I'm going to stick to characters coded as men. And in addition to choosing to die to save someone, all of these men had done bad things, and in a strange way, it seems, like in order to right their wrongs, they felt like they could be forgiven if they did something heroic that led to their imminent deaths. Anakin, who had come to enjoy murder as Darth Vader, knew the Emperor would attack him when he proceeded to take him down. Obi-Wan, who was a liar and a cheat, let's remember, let Vader strike him down. Han, another liar and cheat, let Ben kill him because what other value did Han feel like he had left if not to be a more present father? And Ben, the one with the most blood directly on his hands probably of anyone on this list, had most of his life beaten out of him and then gave what was left to let Rey live. None of these men were really allowed to change their ways and to do better and to go on and live. And that's not a pattern unique to Star Wars, where characters who are men feel obliged to die in order to save someone, as if somehow to make up for all the wrong they'd done before. Maybe it happens in some of your favorite movies. Titanic, anyone? The incredible Western Shame. It sure happens in a lot of my favorite movies. V for Vendetta, the Matrix series, right at the end, and Gladiator are some examples that are on frequent viewing at my house. All of these characters are role models for young men as they grow up, which means we have a pattern of role models for young men observing their behavior, taking lessons from the values embedded in the films. Star Wars is deeply entrenched in global culture, which has also been talked about in some really excellent Star Wars channels, and I'll link a few in the box. So young men all over the world see these films, and behavior they see modeled over and over is that of making up for mistakes by giving up their lives. We are not going to tread over the debunked myth that violence in video games or movies leads directly to violent behavior. It does not directly do that. But we do absorb the values of the society around us, including what's presented in the media that we consume. And all of these men who are dying to make up for past wrongs is sending some kind of message in those films. I'm not a parent of young men, but if I were, I'd be anxious about the values embedded in the idea that I can make up for past mistakes by dying, preferably in some kind of heroic way. Pardon the dramatic language, but it's an important question of values that movie studios are pushing into our heads. And I have to ask, do men who genuinely repent their bad behavior not deserve to live? Or more broadly, if not these men, then who deserves the chance to live and atone for their past behavior? Speaking as a mental health professional, the answers to these questions are very important because they represent the foundational beliefs young men develop about themselves and how they're allowed to approach living their lives. We're going to talk about this. We're also going to talk about the importance of role modeling, what it means to deal with consequences. We're missing the opportunity to role model what living looks like, what it means to mess it all up, and then to try to make amends. So let's start with who gets to live. Counselors of all kinds, social workers, psychotherapists, we work under a lot of different titles around the world every day are talking people down from doing harm to themselves and to others, mostly themselves. Every day, everywhere. So much of the pain that causes someone to fall into depression or spiral into anxiety and fail to take care of themselves and even wish themselves harm is the sense that other people do not love them. This experience happens to people who've done nothing wrong, but it also happens as part of the process as someone who's done wrong works through the consequences and is seeking support and guidance as they put their post-mistake life back together. Family, friends, and other loved ones will frequently have rejected them, sometimes temporarily, sometimes permanently. And even if not, there's often a sense of distance, real or imagined. They don't love me as much as they used to now that they know what I did isn't an unusual belief for someone who's made a mistake to have. And these rejections lead to terrible loneliness. It's like the person who made the mistake feels like they've died because of these relationship losses. And the general public and people who know the offender, if you will say terrible things like, it's easy to find examples on social media, you should just kill yourself. You don't deserve to live for what you did. The world would be better off without you. Society at large, and the unfiltered internet in particular, can be cruel. And let's be clear, I'm not defending those few rare monsters out there. The average person who screws up and does something terrible, even does a few things that are terrible, also does things that are pretty good at other times. Most people aren't monsters. They're regular people who've screwed up, and yet in public discourse, the response can feel the same. You don't deserve to live. It's hard to find movies or television where someone who's done bad things gets the opportunity to redeem themselves through living a better life. The message is that they should find some noble way to die. I haven't done a deep dive, but I have the feeling that some of this is tied up in incidents where someone deliberately provokes a law enforcement response and engages in threatening behavior in order to get themselves shot. It's called suicide by cop. And it's awful. It's awful for everyone involved, from the police officers to the family of the person who dies this way. It seems to me that we could prevent a fair amount of pain and misery for many people if, as a society, we could learn to be more forgiving, not forgetting and not letting unacceptable behavior go unaddressed. But maybe we could support people who've done terrible things and who want to atone for their poor decisions by making it up to society somehow to do that, to learn how to change their behavior. That's what psychological treatment is about, learning to think and behave differently, and to make it up to the communities they injured with their past behavior. This is a very different attitude than punishment. But in case you're wondering, the fear of punishment doesn't work very well as a deterrent. All you have to do is look at North America's very full prisons. Punishment, or the threat of it, isn't solving any problems. And I do not mean to suggest that atonement wouldn't feel like self-selected punishment at times. It certainly could. Doing enough good to make up for wrongs could take the rest of someone's life. Mending relationships is not quick. Regaining trust is not easy. And an offender may have to work on their redemption in their community for decades. But at least then we're not adding pain to their family by taking them away to a prison or a cemetery. And they're adding goodness to the world. So let's talk about how you would go about redeeming yourself. Let's talk about what it means to mess it all up and then try to make amends. We almost never get to see that in media. Sometimes in my counseling work, I get to see it work itself out in the real world. But just as often, I see people decide to give up, and we see divorce, employment termination, and so on. The other major source of pain that social workers and psychotherapists are supporting people through is learning to manage guilt. The kinds of people who can recognize that what they did was wrong and who want to try to make amends feel guilty for their mistakes. Guilt is an uncomfortable feeling, and it motivates us to take some action to make it go away. That's a good thing. But we don't get a lot of serious examples in media to teach us, young people in particular, what kinds of actions would be appropriate to correct our wrongs, to reduce our guilt, or what process we could follow to figure out a path to redemption. Think about what we see in regard to romantic relationships in film and television. Of course, there are always conflicts because entertainment needs to create some tension in those relationships, otherwise they're a little dull. We're also robbed of the opportunity to teach what a healthy, loving relationship might look like for the sake of that entertainment. Very often we see unrealistic kinds of disagreements and unrealistic ways of rebuilding relationships. For example, doctors John and Julie Gottman are some of the world's foremost relationship researchers, famous for their Love Lab, in which they have recorded thousands of hours of couples' interactions. They have identified 4 key behaviors that, unless changed, will almost certainly lead to the end of the relationship. Those are criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. The last one, contempt, is the most fatal to a relationship's survival. And successful relationship behavior has a 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions. So you can imagine that a movie script where a couple is going to save itself has to really limit its conflict and spend the majority of the movie on positive repair processes if it wants to be at all realistic. The path to relationship repair is known. The path to redeeming oneself after other terrible behavior is, to my knowledge, not so clear, and probably depends on each person's unique set of circumstances. For example, if your best friend caused a car accident and someone died in the vehicle they struck, how would they go about making the world right? And how would you go about making the world right if it had been you in that accident? You and your best friend have different life circumstances, different emotional capacity, different skills to offer to try to do some good in the world. It wouldn't be the same path. In my work, I strive to learn and encourage my students to learn about North American Indigenous lenses, how to approach repairing the damage caused by violence. And one of the most significant ideas from Indigenous cultures in my part of Canada is that an incident of violence hurts everyone in the community, and therefore everyone could and should be engaged in the healing process to some degree. Some people at a distance, others at a deeper level. Punishing someone for violence with more violence just adds violence. That doesn't make any sense. Exiling the offender, as we do today by putting them in a prison, leads to loss. Another family is deprived of someone they love. We're reducing the amount of love in a community. Doesn't make sense. So, why should Disney make The Hunt for Ben Solo? That's the big question. Why is the as yet unmade film on my mind in relation to this discussion? First, because it would be huge. The Star Wars sequel films made billions with a B. People know and love Star Wars, so it would also have global reach. And even though nobody has any idea what the story would be about, the title tells us quite a bit, especially that the film is focused on the story of a man who committed violence on both a grand scale and a very personal scale, and who realized he was in the wrong and began to try to make it right. We don't know what good he could have done to make up the damage he'd caused before, because the story writers decided he didn't deserve the right to live, even though he had realized he was wrong and showed up to begin the process of making things right. And that's the value judgment that I opened up with before. Societal narratives often tell us that people who've made grave mistakes ought to die, like somehow their suffering and their family's suffering makes up for the suffering they caused. But it doesn't really. It just adds hurt to the world. Suffering plus suffering equals suffering, right? Maybe you've heard the expression, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. So, where someone is genuinely remorseful for what they've done to cause some hurt, they are doing some suffering. That feeling is guilt. And I would rather see them given the opportunity to try to create some light to make up for the darkness that they caused. Because darkness is canceled out by the light. Light can make the darkness less hurtful. And more media showing first that this is a possibility, and second, what it might look like to add light or atone or find redemption, whatever you want to call it, is important. It gives hope that things can be made better and hope that young men can be allowed to live even after they've made mistakes. They might be atoning for the rest of their lives, but they can live. Let's also remember that the ways in which Ben Solo might be able to try to make up for the damage he's done as Kylo Ren, it could be pretty spectacular. I mean, especially if he and Rey are able to reconnect, which seems a likely part of the plot. The good that they could do between Rey's good sense and Ben's strategic thinking, and I mean, their heckin' strong command of the Force, is huge. We don't know what Driver and Soderbergh had in mind, but redemption has been a major plot factor in many Soderbergh films. And he's a director that I would trust to do a Ben-demption story justice. So as always, my ask to Disney, and especially now that there are new leaders coming in, is please. There's so much potential in this story to make money, and Soderbergh has a history of doing a lot with relatively small budgets. There's the potential to make so many Star Wars fans who felt like the ending of The Rise of Skywalker was poorly thought out to feel better about the sequels. And there's the chance to make a hopeful statement that gives hope to people who've messed up and who don't have hope that they can move forward, that redeeming oneself and living is hard, but possible. George Lucas said that Star Wars has always been about hope. So let's see it.